The sound had become as constant in the camp as the low crackle of faulty solar panels or the suspicious hiss of the food dispensers. It wasn't the usual cry of an infant, not a hungry whimper, nor a scream of pain or fear. This was a wail that seemed engineered by some spiteful deity, vibrating straight through helmets, boring into eardrums, and nesting deep inside the weary, sleepless hearts of all sentient beings within range. Sergeant Elias Vaughn slouched against a stack of thermal blanket crates, gnawing on a ration bar that promised beef flavor, but tasted more like betrayal mixed with regret. The baby's piercing cry tore through the air again. Even a passing growth soldier, a battle-hardened insectoid with 6 combat scars and 0 recorded emotions, shivered and muttered something that might have been a prayer. "Still going," Elias said under his breath to no one in particular. The squad's AI, Harv-E, chimed pleasantly in his ear. Continuous crying time. 61 hours, 42 minutes. "Thanks, Harv. You've been a beacon of absolute joy." "You're welcome, Sergeant." The child belonged to a Terrene woman posted on the far side of the refugee camp. People now avoided her tent, which pulsed faintly with psionic residue and carried the sour-sweet scent of despair-flavored formula. She seldom left, cradling her child in arms that glowed faintly in darkness, as all Terrene did. Occasionally, someone attempted to help. A determined nurse, a cranky botanist with natural sedatives, even one fool who brought a holographic mobile playing Terran lullabies. The mobile had exploded. Elias tossed the rest of his ration bar into the waste unit and stood up. He wasn't a hero, a medic, or a babysitter. But there was something about the pitch of that cry, something that made the hair on his arms lift in protest. "You going in there?" Private Dre's voice came from the shadows, eyes wide. "Yeah, figured I'll either help or explode. Maybe both. Keep a mop nearby." The tent's interior was dim, lit only by the soft bioluminescent spirals on the Terrene mother's skin. She glanced up as Elias stepped inside, eyes glowing gold but hollow, clutching the writhing bundle of misery. The infant's small antennae quivered like they were trying to tune into the frequency of universal doom. "I'm not here to prod or poke," Elias said, hands raised in peace. "Just trying something different." The crying ceased. It was as if the universe had hit pause. The sudden silence was so complete Elias actually checked to make sure the child was still breathing. Yes, and now staring straight at him, wide alien eyes locked on his face, antennae trembling in what could only be curiosity. Then came the impossible. A small gurgle, almost laughter. The Terrene woman blinked at him. How? How did you do that?" "I have no idea," Elias said, lowering himself onto a nearby crate. "Maybe I smell like failure. Babies love that." Her shoulders eased slightly. The baby cooed again. Elias extended a tentative finger, and tiny suction cup fingers latched on with surprising strength. "He's never done that," she whispered. "Never stopped. Never looked at anyone like that." Elias shrugged. "I'm kind of a big deal among small, screaming life forms. My niece once projectile vomited into my ear, then took her first steps chasing me with a plastic sword. Bonding through chaos." The child's grip stayed firm. Harv-E pinged again. "Sergeant, local psionic activity is shifting." "Yeah," Elias muttered. "So's my blood pressure." Elias stayed in that cramped, dim tent far longer than he'd intended. The Terrene woman, her name was Sira, he learned, watched him as though unsure if he was a miracle or a malfunction. The baby, impossibly, didn't cry again. Not once. Instead, the small creature clung to Elias's finger or stared at him with those luminous eyes, antenna making slow, lazy sweeps as though testing the air. They talked a little. Well, Sira spoke softly about the endless weeks since the evacuation, the fever that wouldn't break, the medics who tried and failed, the herbalists who offered charms, the engineers who insisted a soundproof pod was the only hope. "I started thinking," she admitted, voice raw, "that maybe he wasn't meant to stay." Elias shook his head. "Nah, he's stubborn. I can tell. Has the same look my sergeant had during boot camp, the I will survive out of spite face." She almost smiled. When the sky outside darkened to the deep violet of Terrene night, Sira hesitated before offering him a folded thermal wrap. If you stay, maybe he'll sleep." Elias looked at the baby, then back at her. "Ma'am, I've been in firefights with less pressure." But he stayed. Hours later, Elias found himself half reclined on a storage crate, the baby asleep against his chest, its tiny warmth seeping through his uniform. Every so often, a faint hum vibrated from the child. A Tureen infant's version of a purr, Sira explained. Harvey's voice came low over his comm. "This is the quietest it has been in 2.5 days. Elias murmured, "Don't jinx it, Harv." Morning, or whatever passed for morning under the colony's artificial cycle, arrived to find Sira dozing lightly in the corner. Elias's neck ached. His arm was numb, and he'd slept maybe 20 minutes. The baby woke, blinked at him, then made a noise somewhere between a chirp and a sigh.
No crying.
Sira stirred, eyes wide when she saw them. "He's calm. Guess I have that effect on small aliens and bad coffee machines," Elias said, stretching carefully so as not to wake the kid fully. She leaned forward, searching his face. "I don't understand why." "Maybe," he offered, "he just needed someone with worse posture than him." Sira's laugh this time was real, soft, and almost shy. Outside, the camp's usual morning chaos resumed. Supply drones buzzing, arguments over rations, someone swearing at a sanitation unit. But inside that tent, it felt like a fragile bubble of stillness had formed. Elias had no idea how long it would last. He only knew the kid hadn't cried once since he walked in. By midday, word had already spread. Elias couldn't cross the camp without catching someone staring. Engineers pausing mid-repair, medics peeking out of triage units, even the growth soldier from yesterday following him with all 6 eyes. The reason was simple. The baby was still in his arms. Still quiet. Still almost content. He'd intended to hand the kid back to Sira after breakfast. But every time he shifted away, the small hands tightened around his uniform like tiny magnetic clamps, and the quiet bubble threatened to burst. So he kept walking, the baby perched on one arm like he'd been doing it his whole life. At the comms tower, Private Dre whispered to another soldier, "Is that the one? The crying doom spawn?" Elias shot them a look. "He has a name, you know?" "He does. I don't know yet, but he will." The baby made a soft chirp, as if backing him up. Harvey's voice hummed in his ear. "Sergeant, camp productivity has increased 12% since your intervention. Guess everyone works better without the constant scream soundtrack," Elias said. When he finally made it to the command unit, Commander Roddy's, a broad-shouldered half-cyborg with a face like a weathered boulder, raised one steel eyebrow. "Vaughn, explain." Baby likes me. Stopped crying. World hasn't ended yet." Roddy's gaze shifted to the infant, who blinked up at him with unblinking alien serenity. Tureen offspring do not usually bond outside their species. "Guess I'm special," Elias said with a shrug. The commander grunted. "Keep it up, Sergeant. If it buys us silence, you're on permanent babysitting detail." Elias opened his mouth to protest, but the baby gurgled happily, and for some reason, the sound shut him up. On the way out, a passing quartermaster slipped him an extra ration pack for the little one, and a group of engineers insisted on building a carrier rig out of scrap harnesses so he could work hands-free. By the time he returned to Sira's tent, he looked less like a soldier and more like an oddly tall, sarcastic nurse. Sira stared. "What have you done?" "Improvised," Elias said, adjusting the harness. "He seems fine with it." Indeed, the baby had already fallen asleep again. That evening, the air in the tent felt different. Lighter somehow, like the stale heaviness that had hung there for weeks had begun to lift. Sira was kneeling on the floor mat, sorting through a small crate of supplies, when Elias ducked inside. The baby was still strapped to his chest in the makeshift harness, tiny antenna twitching lazily. "He didn't cry once today," Sira said without looking up, as though saying it aloud might shatter the fragile truth. "Yeah," Elias replied. "I think he's just in it for the free rides." She glanced at him, the faint bioluminescence along her cheekbones brighter than he'd seen before. "You're different with him. You're not afraid." "Why would I be? Most humans are. Even some Terrene are cautious. He's strong already. His mind pushes outward without control. That's why everyone feels his emotions so sharply." Elias thought about it, then shrugged. "Guess I've spent enough time around loud sergeants and bad comms feedback. My brain's already fried." That earned him the smallest smile. She rose and came closer, reaching to unclip the harness. The baby stirred, then made a soft noise that Elias had not yet heard from him. It was high and sudden, followed by a kind of hiccuping squeal. Syrah froze. Her golden eyes widened. "Was that?" "Sounded like a laugh," Elias said, surprised. She touched the child's head gently, as if afraid he might vanish. "It is. It's his first." The baby did it again, this time grabbing Elias's chin in his tiny suction cup fingers, as if to make sure his audience was paying attention. Elias chuckled. "Guess I'm funny in 2 galaxies now." Harv E's voice buzzed over his comm. "Sergeant, psionic activity from the infant has stabilized. Ambient distress levels have dropped 70%. Syrah's gaze softened. "He feels safe." Elias shifted the baby to one arm. "Then maybe that's the whole trick." The baby gave another laugh, and this time even Syrah couldn't hold back her own. The sound filled the tent, warm and unforced, like the first hint of sunlight after a long winter. By the next morning, Elias realized the camp had officially decided he was some sort of legend. It started with breakfast. A cook who normally barked at anyone daring to ask for extra portions slid an extra serving onto his tray without a word. An engineer handed him a cup of real coffee, not the bitter synth brew, muttering, "For services rendered to our sanity." Even the growth soldier from before gave him what might have been a respectful nod. Or possibly indigestion. It was hard to tell with growth. Elias walked through the camp with the baby in the harness, both of them receiving waves and cautious smiles. Conversations quieted as they passed, like the sound of the child's laughter the night before still lingered in the air. When they reached Syrah's tent, she was already outside, speaking with a medic. She looked more rested than he'd ever seen her, her shoulders no longer locked in that perpetual hunch of exhaustion. "You've changed him," she said plainly as Elias approached. "Changed both of us." He shook his head. "All I did was hang around and make bad jokes." Her eyes caught his. "Sometimes that's enough to turn the tide." Before he could reply, Harv E pinged in his ear. "Sergeant, command requests your immediate presence." Elias glanced at Syrah. "Guess the honeymoon's over." She stepped closer, placing a hand briefly on his arm. "No matter what they say, remember, you've given us peace we thought we'd never have again." He nodded, then headed toward the command unit, the baby making a soft humming sound in his sleep. Inside, Commander Roddy's was waiting, datapad in hand. "Vaughn, the Terrene Council has heard about this connection. They want you on transport to their capital. Now." Elias blinked. "I thought my babysitting detail was local." Roddy's mouth twitched. "Not anymore. Apparently, you've been promoted to ambassador of nap time." Elias looked down at the baby, who chose that exact moment to grab his dog tags and chew on them. Great. Diplomatic immunity by drool. The transport to the Terrene capital was a sleek, silver-winged vessel that looked like it had been designed more for elegance than practicality. Elias felt wildly out of place among its smooth curves and soft glowing corridors, his boots clunking against polished floors that practically whispered, "Don't scuff me." Syrah sat across from him, the baby nestled in her arms, but still watching Elias with those unblinking, luminous eyes. Every time Elias tried to look away, the little antenna twitched toward him like a tracking beacon. "Does he ever blink?" Elias asked. "Not when he's focused," Syrah replied, her voice softer now than it had ever been in the camp. "He's learning you." The capital shimmered on the horizon long before they landed. A city of spiraling towers and flowing bridges, its buildings alive with streams of light that moved like water. From above, It looked less like a city and more like a dream someone had painted into reality. Inside the council chamber, the air was thick with formality. 12 Terrene elders, their skin marked with intricate bioluminescent patterns, sat in a half-circle around an inlaid floor that pulsed faintly with energy. Sira stood tall, though her hands tightened on the baby. She spoke in her own language first, the flowing, melodic syllables carrying weight even Elias could feel. Every elder's gaze shifted to him as she spoke, and though he didn't understand the words, he caught his own name more than once. Finally, the eldest counselor turned to him. His voice was deep, resonant, and perfectly clear in Elias's earpiece translator. We are told the child ceased his cries in your presence alone, that his mind, uncontrolled and overwhelming, found rest with you. Elias scratched the back of his neck. Guess so. Not sure how, though. I didn't exactly follow a manual. Such a bond is rare, unprecedented between human and Terrene. The elder leaned forward. We would have you remain with him, as guardian, as anchor. Elias blinked. Guardian? As in, full-time. As in always, the elder said. Sira's eyes were steady on him. The baby made a quiet coo, reaching a tiny hand in his direction. Elias exhaled slowly. Well, I guess I've had worse assignments. The council did not linger once Elias gave his answer. A single nod from the eldest elder sealed it. No lengthy debates, no ceremonial speeches, just the quiet hum of agreement that carried the weight of permanence. Sira bowed deeply, her bioluminescent patterns shifting into a softer hue. Elias stood awkwardly, unsure if he was supposed to bow back or salute, eventually settling on an uncomfortable half-nod that made two elders raise their brows. By the next morning, word had already reached the camp. When Elias stepped off the transport, carrying the baby against his chest, the usual bustle slowed. Medics paused mid-inventory, engineers stopped tightening bolts, and even the ever-stoic growth soldier gave him something that might have been a respectful gesture. Or possibly a pre-battle stretch. Private Dre was the first to speak. So it's true? You're leaving with them? Elias glanced down at the baby, who was happily gnawing on his uniform strap. Looks that way. My new commanding officer drools a lot, but he's got potential. Commander Roddy's emerged from the command unit, datapad in hand. You'll be missed, Vaughn. Not just because you brought the first real silence this camp's had in months. Thanks, sir. I'll try not to start any interstellar incidents. Or at least keep them funny. Supplies were loaded quickly. The Terrene didn't waste time when decisions were made. Sira stood nearby, her expression calm but her eyes betraying relief. Before boarding, Elias took one last look at the camp. The cracked landing pads, the patched-up tents, the stubborn hum of life persisting in the middle of nothing. He hadn't expected to care about the place. Now it felt like leaving a strange, chaotic home. Private Dre gave a sharp two-fingered salute. Safe travels, Sergeant. And, keep that kid happy. For all our sakes. Elias smirked. That's the plan. He climbed aboard, the hatch sealing behind him with a final hiss. Outside, the camp receded until it was just a smudge on the barren landscape, but the quiet warmth against his chest reminded him he wasn't heading into emptiness. The return trip to the Terrene capital felt different from the first. Last time, Elias had been a reluctant passenger, unsure what he was walking into. Now, there was a strange sense of certainty humming under his skin. Not comfort exactly, but the steady weight of a decision made. The baby, still without an official name Elias could pronounce, spent most of the flight nestled against him, emitting the occasional soft hum that Sira explained was a Terrene infant's way of reinforcing connection. Every time Elias shifted, the tiny suction cup fingers reasserted their grip on his uniform, as if making sure he didn't vanish between one heartbeat and the next. When they docked, the city unfolded again in that same mesmerizing swirl of light and architecture. This time, Elias noticed details he'd missed before. The way the bridges seemed to breathe with the flow of foot traffic, the faint music that drifted through the air like a living pulse. Sira led him to a set of chambers carved into the side of a spire. Inside, the rooms were warm and softly lit, the walls patterned with the same spirals of light that ran along her skin. "This is yours now," she said simply. "Yours and his." Elias stepped inside, taking in the strange mix of alien elegance and practical necessity. A low sleeping platform, a corner cradle, a rack clearly meant for armor and gear. The baby wriggled in his arms, making a sound somewhere between a sigh and a contented chirp. Elias looked down. "Guess we're roommates now." Syrah's gaze softened. "Guardian and child. Anchor and star." He chuckled. "That's a lot of responsibility for a guy whose greatest skill used to be surviving bad rations." "You've already proven it's more than that," she said, then turned toward the door. "Rest. You will need it." When the door closed, Elias sat on the edge of the sleeping platform, the baby still holding his finger. Outside, the city's lights shifted toward the deep blues of nightfall. He thought about the camp, about the endless cries that had filled it for days, about the quiet that followed once he stepped into that tent, about how something so small had completely rerouted the course of his life. The baby made one last hum before drifting off to sleep. Elias leaned back, letting the stillness settle around them. Somewhere far below, the city kept breathing. But here, in this small, glowing room, it felt like the entire galaxy had gone quiet just for them.